Now, I must stress, none of what I'm saying here is against Laurel Hubbard. Scientifically speaking, is it fair for trans women to compete with natural born women? In my opinion, hello YouTube, how you doing? Bringing you a quick little video today just to discuss a topic that I was talking about on my Instagram stories, and that is whether or not trans female athletes should compete with natural born females in the Olympics. I was talking about the IOC's decision regarding their testosterone cutoff. I've got quite a few things I want to talk about today, so without further ado, let's get to it. So before I start talking about the actual meat and potatoes of the conversation, and that's the nanomoles per litre that the IOC said, I want to go over some basic advantages that males will have over females just from simply experiencing a male puberty. So I haven't actually seen these things being talked about that much. I know that Derek for More Plates, More Dates did touch on this slightly, but it's just the basic things that men get during their puberty that females don't get to the same levels. So there are four main advantages of a male puberty we need to discuss: bone mineral density, lung capacity, heart size, and the obvious one is height. Bone mineral density, as you can see here, there's a study talking about the gender disparities in osteoporosis, and you can see it sums. In summary, males tend to have higher bone density and content, and they achieve it later in life compared with females. This difference is not explained through nutrition, level of activity, body weight, or lean mass, but it may be because of the bone size, meaning men, due to their puberty, tend to get larger bones. I mean, it sounds stupid, but our skeletal mass is larger than females, which means we have a higher capacity to hold mass on our frame compared to our smaller female counterparts. So why does that make a difference? Well, pretty simply put, more muscle equals more strength. If you have a frame larger that can hold more muscle, you have a much higher capacity to gain more strength. Next up, we want to talk about lung disparity between male and females. The volume of an adult female lung is typically 10 to 12% smaller than the males of the same height and age. So why would lung capacity help us? Well, pretty simple. If your VO2 max is higher than your female counterparts, you can train harder and longer in your off season. If you could do an extra rep a set, an extra set a session, an extra session a week, all of that will add up to better performance on your on platform. And when you're talking about these kind of weightlifting, strength, power events, if you can add an extra fractional plate on that bar, and that's the difference between first and second. If you can do an extra set or two in your off season, you 100% would. Similar thing goes for heart capacity. So as you can see here, there is no significant difference in cardiac size between males and females until the onset of puberty. And it seems that after puberty, there's a 15 to 30% increase in heart mass, which is probably due to the body size. And it basically meaning during puberty, males' hearts will grow larger than their female counterparts. As summarised here, the average adult male heart beats 70 to 72 beats per minute, while the average adult female heart is 78 to 82, with difference largely accounted for the size of the heart, which is typically smaller in females than it is in males. Exact same thing with lung capacity. If your heart is larger, you're able to pump around more blood, less beats per minute, you can push yourself harder than your female counterparts. And lastly, this is kind of obvious, but because of the three I mentioned before, men tend to be taller. And this brings me back to what I said in the first thing about bone mineral density. Because we have large bones, we can hang more muscle on our frame. And you can't forget that because bone mineral density is higher in males, we can probably handle more impact than our female counterparts due to that bone density. So now, the whole reason I put the story on Instagram in the first place is talk about the IOC's decision about having 10 nanomoles per deciliter for trans female athletes. You've probably seen articles like this one here talking about athletes' total testosterone level must be below 10 nanomoles per litre throughout the period of desired eligibility to compete in the female category. Another example here from the BBC, same sort of gist, and they're talking about how you have to meet a certain testosterone level to be able to compete in the female category. So, what does that actually mean? Well, here's the actual document of the IOC consensus meeting regarding trans athletes. And if you scroll down, you will see the athlete must demonstrate a total testosterone level of below 10 nanomoles per 10 nanomoles per litre for at least 12 months prior to a competition, and it also states about how she needs to do it during the competition as well. 10 nanomoles per litre is ridiculous. That is absolutely insane. Why? What does that mean? Well, here's an example of the differences in testosterone level between males and females. So, essential points here, and this does range quite a lot. Males do have a very large range of testosterone, but I will come to that very shortly. But if you see here, the male ranges from 7.7 to 29.4 nanograms per deciliter in healthy men. Their female counterparts is 0.17 nanomole per deciliter. So to make this easier to see, on this study, they've gone through numerous other studies that took averages of the male and female. So if you look here, you can see, talking about the men, these are men with the lower averages. So you've got 10.4, 10.1, 7.2. I think the lowest one here is 7.1 nanomoles per litre. The lowest male has 7.1. And so we're now saying that to be able to compete with the females, you have to be lower than 10. Well, there are natural males who have no inhibitors at all that can be as low as 7.1. Are they eligible to compete with the females? But males also, as you can see here, can go as high as 30, 39 nanomoles per litre, which is a crazy amount. What about women? How much testosterone do women naturally have in their system? On the high end, the most here is 2.8. So the outlier of all of these studies, the highest testosterone count of the female and across all of these studies was 2.8 nanomoles per litre. And the IOC is saying as long as you're under 10, you can compete with the females. So you can get males. In this study, there's loads of males here who naturally have less than 10 nanomoles per litre with no drugs at all to lower the testosterone level. No testosterone inhibitors, no estrogen in the system at all, and they just naturally are below the threshold. Are they allowed to compete? So what does all this mean? This is all a lot of jargon to you. So what does this actually mean? The average testosterone range for males is around 270 to 1070 nanograms per deciliter. The average being about 700 is the normal average for males. So, 1 nanomole per litre is roughly 28.8 nanograms per deciliter. So if you're the average male, you've got 679 nanograms per deciliter testosterone, you will have 23.5 nanomoles per litre. So, if you are as low as 10 nanomoles per litre, you do feel pretty crap as a male. Don't get things twisted. You do feel run down, poor sleep, you're not growing muscle as well. But that's still 4 to 5 times higher than the top end of females. Now we're talking about the Olympics here, so we're going to be talking about the top end of female performance. We're not talking about the average person. The average female has about 40 to 50 nanograms per deciliter. We're not talking about those guys because let's face it, your average female, they're not going to be going for Olympic gold medals, are they? We are talking about the outliers of the females, the highest of the high. But as we saw, the highest of the high was 2.8 nanomoles per litre. 2.8 nanomoles per litre is the equivalent of 80 nanograms per deciliter. 80. 10 nanomoles per litre is 288. So as long as your testosterone as a trans female athlete is 200 nanograms per deciliter higher than your female counterparts, you're okay to compete. Logic. So best case scenario, if you are coming in at 10 nanomoles per litre as a trans female, you're still going to be 4 times higher testosterone level than your female counterpart, best case scenario. That's just crazy. But something that isn't spoken about is when did that person transition? Laura Hubbard transitioned at 35 years old. She's 43 now. That means she would have had a good 20 years with male levels of testosterone, 10 times higher than females. So how is that an advantage? Well, let's have a look. It's obvious and doesn't need explaining that a higher level of testosterone will mean you can put on more physical muscle mass than someone with a low testosterone. So, when you build muscle, it's not just simply a case of the muscle just grows. You have to have something called myonuclei. And what this is, if you imagine you've got a muscle fiber that is X large, and in that fiber you have a satellite cell, a myonuclei. Eventually, when that fiber grows too big, this myonuclei can no longer control the whole fiber. You have to recruit new myonuclei to allow that fiber to grow. So it's a very simplified explanation of what's actually happening here. But when you keep growing muscles, you keep growing your muscles, you keep recruiting more muscle fibers, you get more myonuclei. When you then stop training, that myonuclei doesn't go anywhere. So a good example of what I'm trying to say is this image here. You can see you've got an untrained muscle fiber with 4 satellite cells, 4 myonuclei. That individual trains for X amount of time. The muscle fibers grow and it recruits more satellite cells, turning it into myonuclei, and then you get the hypertrophied muscle, which is now larger with more satellite cells. When you stop training, the muscle fibers will atrophy, they will get smaller, but your satellite cells, your myonuclei will remain, which is then as soon as you start retraining again, you can rebuild that muscle much faster. Which is why you have something called muscle memory. If you stop training for 2 years and start training again, you will regain the lost muscle in half the time it took you to initially build it. This is why steroids will permanently increase your performance. If you've been cycling steroids on and off for 2 to 3 years, gained as much mass as you possibly can, you end your cycle, you wait 30 to 50 days to start your PCT, depending on the half-life of the chemical, of course. You finish your PCT for 12 to 18 weeks. You get to the point now where all trace of it has left your body. If you've done things properly, your natural level of testosterone starts to rebuild again, so you're naturally producing testosterone like you would have done. You go take a blood test, you look natural. There's no traces of chemicals in your body at all. You can naturally compete. You may not have any of that drug left in your system, and you may have lost a significant amount of muscle mass compared to when you were at the peak of your cycle. You will still have retained all of that myonuclei. All of that potential to build muscle will still be there inside your muscles, and you will perform better on the stage because of it. It's the reason why, even if you've been natural for 2 to 3 years, if you were on PEDs, you're not allowed to complete your naturals. Now, when you're talking about males versus females, if you're the average male with 600 to 700 nanograms per deciliter testosterone, and the average female has 40 to 50, you have 10 to 15 times more testosterone than she would have done. That is insane. That's like a woman being on the most insane steroid stock possible. It's like if she was taking a gram of testosterone a week and a gram of tren on top to try and match you, and you were doing that for 20 years. So a good example here is this study. It's essentially testing whether you lose myonuclei during atrophy of the muscle. And I think it's summarized perfectly here, where it, in a nutshell, it's just basically explain when you undergo atrophy and you lost approximately 50% of muscle mass, there was no loss of myonuclei. And it's also summed up very nicely around here, if I can find it. The use of anabolic steroids is a potent stimulus for muscle hypertrophy, and in addition to new myonuclei. Since these myonuclei persist long after muscle use ends, athletes likely derive the benefits of illegal drug use without the risk of detection. In summary, the new myonuclei growth is largely accepted, but the loss of nuclei during atrophy cannot be supported. So it means appears once acquired, myonuclei persist even after the muscle becomes atrophied or cell death. So if you are in a case of Laura Hubbard, you've had 20 years of training with male levels of testosterone, 10 to 15 times higher than her female counterparts, and you've gained all of that muscle mass, all of those myonuclei within that tissue, and then suddenly you go on estrogen and testosterone blockers for 2 to 3 years, putting you at really low T, below 10 nanomoles per litre, which is apparently low, given it's 4 times higher than your female counterparts. You will still have all of that myonuclei in that muscle. All of that potential for strength, power and hypertrophy will still be within that muscle. That hasn't gone anywhere. you still got the advantages of increased bone mineral density, the advantage of increased lung capacity, the advantages of larger heart, being taller, the advantages of having insane levels of testosterone when compared to female counterparts. For 20 years, all of that muscle fibre and myo-nuclei retention is all still there. Being on low T will not suppress any of those advantages. So something that I haven't seen spoken about that much, other than Derek spoke about a little bit on More Plates, More Dates, that is the sex hormone binding globulin. Now, what is that? In a nutshell, it's basically a chemical within your body that binds to testosterone, DHT, other hormones like that. It binds to them and it renders them inactive in your blood. So if you a man with 600 to 700 nanograms of testosterone, so the average range, but he's also got above average levels of SHBG, it will bind to some of that testosterone and stop it being bioavailable within the body. It essentially lowers the amount of free testosterone you have, and that's something that's not actually mentioned here, is free testosterone. Women have very high levels of SHBG comparatively to male counterparts. So again, looking at NHS website, you can see the average male has 19 to 145 nanomoles per litre, when the average male has 15 to 64 nanomoles per litre. So if you've got two athletes, a biological female and a trans female athlete, let's just say they both got the same test levels. The trans female athlete has had her testosterone chemically reduced down to, let's say, 5 nanomoles per litre, and the female is 1 in a billion specimen who has got insane natural levels of 5 nanomoles per litre. Insane. There's a very, very high chance that the trans female athlete will still have more free testosterone than her naturally born female counterpart, simply because she will have less SHBG in her system than the biological female will do. If her SHBG is higher and hers is then lower, the free test will be significantly higher, giving once again the trans athlete an unfair advantage. So when you compare the fact that, to some, when you compare the fact that you have bigger lungs, increased heart size, increased bone mineral density, the 10 nanomole per litre cutoff is 4 times higher than the best case female counterpart. You've had male levels of testosterone for 20 goddamn years in your system, giving you insane benefits like myo-nuclei retention, and the fact that your SHBG is probably significantly lower, giving you more free testosterone. There's no way this is fair to natural born females. There's just too much evidence showing that there is an unfair advantage towards trans women in this competition. Now I must stress, please, none of this is meant negatively towards Laura Hubbard. It's really not. I have no hate towards her at all. She should be so proud of transitioning, and if I see any hate in the comment section regarding her or trans women in general, I will be deleting your comments, simply put. This is purely a conversation about whether trans females should compete with natural born females. And from the science that I've gone through today, I personally think no. I think, just like Greg Doucet perfectly pointed out, there should be a trans Olympics just like we have the Paralympics. They should be able to compete just like the rest of us. With the information we have, I don't see how it is even remotely fair to have male genetics, even with them being as hindered as they are, being able to compete with females. That's just my opinion. Please comment below, let me know what you think. Let's keep the debate healthy, let's keep the debate clean. I want to see no malicious content at all. Let me know. And guys, I'll see you in the next one.